Hi, Eric.
Hello. Here, I'll be right back.
Sure. We'll wait a couple of minutes for people to show up.
Sounds good.
Are you still working on the pass-through option?
Yeah, so I mean I have like it's pretty much, it exists. So I added some extensions to the signature verifier, so it actually like returns information about the certificate that was used to validate. But I realized that Rego, since I changed the contract. So let me see. So before what did we do? Before we kind of set up our server, the handler, to return only one value for like is success, and that doesn't really work if you want to return more stuff. So here, I gave a link to like where it. So we essentially take all of the data that we come up with as the result of the validation, and we check the is success field, and then we throw it all away. And I sort of thought that regardless of whether we do pass through or not, it might make sense to change this to return as so the key can still be the subject, but the value would be the entire result field. So
yeah, that makes sense to me.
So I changed that, and Ratify works, but the existing Rego that we have is based on this return. So I've been working on in the Rego playground to figure out how to write like a more I guess a more pragmatic Rego policy.
Yeah, sounds good. So that'll be a part of your changing the response contract.
Yeah, so that's changing the contract is required for pass through to be able to get data back to Gatekeeper, but I think that it would be worth changing it even for non-pass through, just so that we're using the actual response, and we could use errors from individual verifiers, since this would let us pass a lot more information.
Yeah, I agree. I have no concerns. Akash, were you able to catch that?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with that. I think that's actually the best way to go forward. So cool. Thanks, Eric, for picking that out.
Yeah, it does it does mean that the now I'm having to figure out Rego because our first Rego is pretty easy, but like more data is good, but it means that the Rego has to be actually good. So
I'm just making sure everyone is admitted from the lobby. Yeah, I think I got everyone. Hello, Teja. Hello, Sajay. And I see we have a new member. Hello, Binbin.
Yeah.
Are you from ACR Shanghai? Is that correct? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a new engineer in engineer. I joined last month, like May 10th. So currently I'm working on this like Ratify project, but I just like finished the ramping up. So next I will work with everyone to like contribute to this project.
Yeah, that's great. Welcome to the team. I didn't quite catch that. Are you working with which component of Ratify are you working on?
I think it's not decided yet. I will think with Eric to get the area I will work.
Okay, cool. Yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us whenever you have any questions.
Sure, thank you.
I also see Jimmy. Hello, Jimmy. Thank you for the PR.
Yeah, it was a little one, but yeah, hello, how y'all doing?
Good, thank you. Were you able to get everything working after the service account change?
Yeah, actually, the service account change was really just to be able to do what you guys call workload identity. You know, we call it something else, but to do that out of band of Helm. So yeah, that helped, which allowed me to move forward with starting to write out a AWS basic auth provider. So yeah, I'm on my way. I have some questions about it, but of that, yeah, that really helped. Thank you.
Cool. I don't know if you catched what Eric was saying, that he's working on a change that would change the response from Ratify to Gatekeeper, that we will be passing the whole verifier report. Just seeing if you have any additional comment.
No, I remember we talked about that. I want to say a few weeks ago as well, right? So no, I'm wide open to it. I think it gives us more flexibility at the Gatekeeper side.
Okay, great. And Jimmy, did you say you have some questions? Would you like to ask now, or would you like to ask later?
Well, I can ask whenever whenever the opportunity is right. I mean, I don't have my mind around 100% the auth provider framework. And so I was trying to figure out if what I'm doing is the right approach. So maybe if there's something else that's more important, I mean, this is kind of more like here's my code. Does it look right? That type of thing. So maybe, if there's something more important, we can talk about that first. It's up to you.
We have a pretty short agenda today, so feel free to ask now. It's
okay.
Yeah, we have a bunch of little things to go through later. So Go ahead.
So let me pull up my code real quick so I can remember.
Sure. Would you like to share screen?
Yeah, that would probably be a good thing.
While Jim is pulling that, I have a question on returning the response to the Gatekeeper. Are there any size restriction? Like if I have so many verifiers, would there be would it be okay with all that response? Did we consider that? If we have a lot of verifiers and then nested verifiers and so on forth.
No, I don't think we've, at least I haven't looked into that, whether like if we have 6,000 artifacts, yeah, like I'd assume since it's just a RESTful call, we potentially are just limited by the size of the payload that can be returned in one go. But yeah, I don't, we haven't explored that.
What is the size of the payload, Eric?
So like essentially taking the entire result and serializing that. So if we had, it ends up being just a bunch of JSON. So if we had like a lot of artifacts, like we would probably end up with a sizable JSON payload. So I mean, I could try that. I could try pushing 1 million signatures and seeing what happens.
I wonder if we want to define like a limit to, you know, if it's over that limit, we'll just return a single result, or we can truncate.
Yeah, I would think that we would time out with Gatekeeper before we hit the upper bound of the response payload. Like, as soon as we're requesting like hundreds of thousands of artifacts, I can't imagine that we will round trip that in 8 seconds, but maybe.
So one thing, Eric, like was there any contract between the gatekeeper and the provider in terms of the response schema? Is there any additional details into which we are planning to dump all our response as a free-form schema?
Yes, so we are allowed to put whatever there is a schema, but within the schema we can put whatever we want. So
the schema.
So I can pull up there's some Gatekeeper documentation about the response structure. And I'll see if I can find a link, but as long as we return within that structure, like if we have the keys are the subject and then the value could be the entire result response. And
do we have version for the schema? Because now people will be consuming this response schema outside Ratify in their regos. Suppose if we change anything on our side, how do we communicate to the clients who build the rego on top of this response if we pass it or if we proxy it upstream?
Right. Yeah, we'll probably have to define some versioning around what we provide back to Rego so we don't break anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to have some form of schema if it is going outside Ratify.
Yeah.
Something to think about. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Teja. Jimmy, I've made you the host, so feel free to present when you're ready.
I'm trying to find my Zoom window again. Hold on. I seem to have lost it here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, because I can't, for whatever, I'm running dual monitors. For whatever reason, I lost my Zoom window and I cannot seem to locate it. Let's see here.
Is it minimized?
Well, the client was minimized, but my meeting window disappeared. What? Oh, goodness.
No problem. Do you want to try leave the meeting and rejoin? Maybe it'll pop back up.
Yeah, I can do that, I guess. I don't know what happened to it.
Sure, I'll reclaim host so I can let you back in.
Can you guys still see me or hear me? I mean,
Yes, we can still hear you.
I don't know what it all of a sudden came back. I don't know what's going on. All right. So I will try to share my screen again here.
Yep, making you the host, dude.
Okay. Okay. Can you all see my screen? I'm in GoLand.
Yep.
Okay. So essentially what I've done is tried to look at wow, this is all over the place. Wow. I must have done something here. VS Code does not have the same shortcuts as anyways, I'm in the yeah, that's better. Much better. So I'm in the package, what is it? Oris refer, was it refer store, Oris auth provider, and then I've added an AWS folder in there, and then I've created this basic auth folder. So, or this basic auth Go file. So I'm using the AWS SDK Go version 2, and I tried to make this the same, the same way that, the Azure one for workload identity was written. I don't know if I'm doing this the correct way, but I'll basically go through and show you what I'm doing. The way that Ursa works is that it's going to use a mutating webhook, so that once I annotate the pod spec, let's say in the deployment of Ratify, I can annotate the pod spec with the right annotation for the role. It will take that annotation and it will go out and add these environment settings and projected volumes to the pod when the pod comes on. So then I can look for the region, the role that it's supposed to use, and then this jot basically in a file path. And so once I find all that stuff, then I can go out and actually get my credentials. My credentials will come back in the form of like a session token, and these creds will return back from this where is it at? Get Ursa creds. And then that is what I was using to inside the create of this provider as well as the provide portion. So what I was, my provider basically had a username, a session token, provider name, and then an expiry, which is when the creds would expire. And so I'm not sure this is the right way to do things. I mean, I tried to, tried to build everything that the provider is supposed to have, like an enabled function as well. In the provide function, I use the expiry to determine, do I need to go out and, reclaim the creds? And if so, I make that call right here, and then I fill back up everything, and then this passes back an auth config, and I believe I'm doing that correctly as well. But before I submit a PR for this, I'm going to obviously test it on my side. But before I submit a PR and write the test up, I want to make sure that I'm on the right track. I'm not sure, who could take a look at that and see that, but
I think Akash, you wrote the Azure one. I mean, to me, just looking at this, it seems reasonable.
Yep.
The only thing I was gonna say is in get Ursa, so that's set the environment variable, right?
yeah. So the one thing that was majorly different from the way that you guys had written, if we pull up the Azure workload identity one, specifically in provide, you're passing in the artifact as a string, and then you're actually using the artifact to get a specific token based on that artifact, I guess. And that's not necessarily how it works with the way that I'm thinking of approaching it with Ursa, because Ursa is going to give me a set of credentials, but basically give me a principal. And from that principal, I'll get those credentials. And those credentials represent that principal. And in order for me to, I can use that principal within the cluster, within the the account that I'm currently in to use that ECR that's tied to that account. And if I want to use it to access ECR registries from different accounts, then there's multiple ways to do that, but all of them are outside of the URSA functionality inside the Go code. I would basically just be going out and either creating resource policies on the remote registries or creating IEM policies inside our, identity and access management to do cross-account, role assumptions. But the idea of, like you guys have, of using the artifact to set up to get the right authorization token or something, that's not something that resonates, I think, with the way that I'm looking at doing this with URSA.
How do you scope the token to a particular registry, Jimmy?
So the way that it works inside inside AWS with URSA is that the role that gets assigned to the pod has a policy, and within that policy, you can decide to scope it if you want. I don't have it scoped right now to any particular repository, and it gets access to, if I give it read access to the registry, and I have resources set to star right now, so it can hit any policy, any ECR registry and repo I want inside that account. And there's basically an ECR registry tied to each region within an account. So if I wanted to be able to access, let's say enlarge the scope to use other ECR registries, then I would physically have to go out to that registry and tell the registry via permissions policy to allow this principal, which is essentially the role, to have access to that ECR registry. And then I could scope it down to specific repos. And actually it's at the repo level. So each repo in a specific ECR registry, I would have to put in those permissions to allow this role that's being assumed by the pod to go outside and into another account's registries. So it's subtly different, I guess, from the way that you all seem to do it. It seems like you have granularity that's of scope per artifact and registry, and we don't necessarily do it that way.
No, I think my confusion is, if you can go back to your Go file, the auth provider is not tied to a registry. The implementation of a provider that API is tied to a registry, if I understand correctly.
So the way that it works, I'll talk through the way that it works on our side, on AWS URSA side. So once I annotate the deployment, the pods will be annotated, and you'll see these environment settings as part of the container, of the pod spec, and then you also see a set of projected volumes. So for instance, this token path environment setting will tell me what path to find this actual jot, and that jot will be contained within a projected volume mapped and mounted inside the container. So Ratify would have access to this volume pointed to by this environment path. And then I would use that jot in these calls down here to actually get the session token, which is what I would need to actually assume the role that I've been given access to at the pod level. Once I have those credentials, then I would pass them back to whatever made this call, whether it be the create function or the provide function. But inside there, the provider itself would end up with a username, the session token, and then the provider name that I've given it, and then an expiry. So there is no direct, within this code, there's no direct scoping of a registry as of right now, because all of that scoping takes place in policies that are attached to the actual role principal, as well as resource policies that are set at the repos outside of this account.
So for ours, the difference, I guess, is just that we use the URL of the registry to scope the token. Is that, Akash, is that right?
Yeah, so for us in our create function, we basically take the same token file that Jimmy's used the environment variable above, and then we exchange that for another identity token scoped to contain a registry, and then using that token in the provide function, depending on the registry that you're providing, we can do another exchange that's scoped to that registry. So there's two exchanges that happen on our side. There's one when you initialize, which is just taking the token file and grabbing the identity token, and then from on the provide function, we do another exchange per registry. But if it's not registry scoped, which is what I think Jimmy's getting to in the AWS case, then whatever token that they exchange on create is the same token that would be used for any other registry.
Yeah. So the reason I
How
want
do you
what I wanted to
handle
point
the
out.
expiry of that, like whatever token that you got during the create, and if you found out it expires during provide?
I think you have a check for that, right, Jimmy?
Yeah. So part of what I built was so in the provide function, which I had a question about this as well, but I basically do something very similar to what you guys are doing, right? I check the time now, and if it's after the expiry, then I go out and get the creds again, and then I fill the provider back up with the creds and the new expire. So that it can be used again for this exact same thing. The only thing that I would point out here is that I don't think that this is going to be 100%. I'd like to see it where we actually take now plus so many minutes, so that because I don't know how long the operations are going to take. And so have you discussed, maybe now is not the right time, maybe now plus so many minutes, or does that not sound right?
You're saying like now minus, so in case the
Time skew thing?
Yeah. I mean, no, what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is if I get in the middle of an operation and then my token expires,
I see.
Because that happens all the time.
Yeah, I think plus or minus, got it. Yeah, not exactly at that moment, makes sense. Yeah, I think this seems to be, if this is the model for ECR, at least for me, it seems straightforward. In fact, it does not have any outbound call, right, if the token is still active. Just curious, like what's the usual lifetime of the token that you get?
I believe on this particular token, it's 60 minutes. So
I see. 1 hour, okay.
Yeah, that my testing so far has seen that. And I wanted to show you the code I wrote for the provider is based on this code that I wrote here, where I'm doing the same thing where I'm going out and getting those environment variables to go out and get my credentials. But one thing I'm also doing is I'm getting an additional 2 environment variables that I've set up to do a remote ECR outside of the account that this cluster is running in. And that allows me to, once I get my credentials and I print them out and everybody can see them during this because this is kind of a test file. But what I also do here is I reset the region to a different region, and I go after an ECR registry, or excuse me, a different account, and I go after a ECR registry in a different account from the account in which this cluster is running. And the way that works is that I'm still using the same principle that is given to me from the URSA inside the account that this cluster is running. However, that principle has been given access to resources in another account by what we call a resource policy. So in our IAM, you can have IAM policies, and then you can have resource policies, and resource policies are right at the resource, and you tell it what principle that you want to have access to that resource and what things that principle can do on that specific resource. So, and it's very specific to that resource, and it doesn't come from IAM. Whereas an IAM policy would be tied to a specific resource within IM. And then you would tell it what permissions you want to give it and what resources you want to allow it to act on. So since we're doing a resource policy at the individual repo, I would be extending the permissions of this principal that's given to me via URSA. I'd be extending it to whatever repos I want to have access to outside of the cluster in which this, or outside the account in which this cluster is running. So it's different than what you guys are, used to doing, I guess.
So do those have two different flows? Is that, or it's the same?
They're kind of out of band. They're kind of out of band from what you guys are doing, with your, registry specific tokens or, repo specific tokens that you get. Ours would be out of band. So basically I would set up the URSA plumbing for Ratify so that I would give it the right principal from the role it assumes, but then extending the permissions of that principal to hit ECR registries and other accounts beyond the one in which this cluster is running. I would, go about that two different ways. One is using resource policies on the repo itself, or using IAM policies and allowing a cross account assumption going on there, which is more complex. But both of those would be outside of the code that actually gets the token, because it would not be ECR specific repo.
I see.
Token.
So regardless of which of those out of band like models you're using, you can use this same URSA auth provider, like the token that you would receive from this auth provider would work regardless of the out of band policy. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
because the out of band work is going to be actually providing the permissions that the role gets, which would be the principal that would be acting here. And the other, the out of band process would be doing that, is providing the role as well as providing the permissions, and explicitly allowing that role to have access to other ECR registries, not something that we would be doing inside here. I mean, nobody inside AWS yet has reviewed my code, so it may change, but I wanted to run this by you initially to make sure that it looked like it was, doing, oops, I'm in your code, looked like it was doing the exact same thing or similar to what you guys are doing, other than it was not doing repo specific tokens.
I mean, at first glance, it looks reasonable to me.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, I haven't looked downstream to see how these things are consumed yet, but I'm just not there yet. But my next step is to internally have it reviewed and make sure that it makes sense from our security perspective, and then I'll submit a PR to have it put in.
Cool.
It looks good to me, Jimmy, at least from my side also.
Okay. Well, again, there's a lot more work that has to go into it, but I just want to make sure I'm approaching it from the right perspective. So are there any other questions?
It's really good to see this PR, Jimmy. I'm just curious, how long does the exchange take?
How long does the exchange take?
Oh, like the token and the authentication, just to compare with the performance numbers Akash collected for ACR.
Oh, I haven't got there yet. I haven't.
Oh, no problem.
It's, I believe it's, I don't know, I'd be guessing, but if it's not sub-second, it's very, it takes no time at all. I mean, but by the time that I deploy this, the pod's already run and completed what I asked it to do, and then I can see that the output. So
you consume the token from the volume mount, right, Jimmy?
I consume a JOT.
JOT, I see. Yeah, that's
I consume
what,
a Java, JavaScript web token. I consume that from the volume mount, and that JavaScript web token is what allows me via a web identity credential framework to get the real AWS tokens that, there's other things it provides that I don't use here. Like, for instance, when I get the creds, when I get the credentials from Ursa, it will actually give me a lot of other things that, you guys are not using, like access key and secret access key is what we call it. But in doing my ECR folks are telling me that, they are wanting to, this whole thing is based on basic auth. And so when you do basic auth, you're just using a username and then the session token. And so that's what I'm using as, that's what gets sent back as the provider, so.
So you get a JOT that is volume mounted to the pod. You take that JOT and exchange it for some other session token from your
Yes.
Ursa endpoint. That is the password that you used to authenticate with ECR.
Yeah, and those credentials that I get from the JOT, those credentials are the ones that expire in like 60 minutes.
I see. Yep. Yeah, it's exactly, we have the similar flow. We get an access token from our AD Active Directory. We exchange it with an ACR scoped token. That is the password that we use to access ACR.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same model. Yep.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. Something I learned new. Yeah.
Yep. And if, again, I have to have the ECR folks, review this, and the security folks review this and make sure that I'm on the right page with what I'm about to submit. And then I'll submit a PR for this work as well. After I have to write the test and all that stuff as well.
Who updates that JOT that is volume mounted? Is it external to Ratify, right? That pod?
Yeah, it's external to Ratify. It's
Got
taken
it.
care of by the webhook,
I see.
the mutating webhook.
Got it. Okay.
Which it's a whole different expiration on it. It's kind of two different processes.
Yeah, but that I think we always can assume that JOT will be active when I consume it.
That is how I understand it, because the webhook is supposed to take care of that
Yep.
automatically. So
Got it. Okay.
Akash, I remember you were saying that the token can expire with the pod identity.
You're muted, maybe. Oh, or maybe your headset's said. Oh, womp womp.
Yeah,
Or
Akash,
maybe it's
you
just
want to disconnect and maybe reconnect the mic. Or you can always type to us.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was just saying that our process is the exact same for our token file that also gets volume mounted by an external webhook. The expiry is 24 hours. So that has a different expiry than the token we use for authenticating to the registry. So also two different expiries.
do you have to manually refresh your projected volume token? That's done for you, right?
It's done for us. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that is something we rely on the platform. I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's
So
a
it's very
similar
similar.
model, Jimmy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different enough.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
glad, right? All these are consistent model. Yeah. Nice. Okay.
So, all right. So yeah, thank you for giving me the time to go through this, because this has been a tremendous learning experience for me. So I appreciate it.
And thank you, Jimmy, yeah, for explaining things.
And if you have any more questions about the auth provider, happy to answer them if you want to post it on GitHub or however.
Yeah, I'd rather meet. Would it be just like open up a discussion for it?
Yep.
And tag you on that? Okay, I can do that.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Jimmy. I'm going to take control back.
Is
all you.
Ursa is similarish to RBAC? If I have to draw parallels, I'm just thinking from an Azure point of view. Ursa and RBAC.
I think it's Ursa's the
Both the
like
AD and RBAC combined.
So Ursa is, it's IAM roles for service accounts. So, right. So
Then
in
RBAC.
identity and access management is where we would create these roles, and then we would annotate the pod with these roles.
Nice.
And so that's a way of us creating the projected volumes and environment settings based on a role tied to that pod. And that's primarily for that, obviously for that pod to do something outside of Kubernetes inside of AWS services. If the pod itself needs, permissions inside the Kubernetes cluster, well, then that's RBAC and not tied to Ursa.
So an Ursa identity
Kubernetes, I think, Eric.
Yeah.
So an Ursa identity would be like an Azure MSI.
Not generic enough. It's very specific to Kubernetes service accounts. AD for the RBAC for the Kubernetes service account.
Okay.
So the actual Ursa, we call it Ursa because it's a Kubernetes thing, but it really is a web identity. So it would be very similar to how a mobile client would gain access to the credentials it needs. It would use a web identity JOT to get that access. And so we just built that as part of Ursa.
Oh, it's like an applications, the AD application service principles. Yeah. But do you use this terminology outside Kubernetes?
So Ursa, no, we don't. Not Ursa itself, but the idea that you would use a JOT web identity to get the actual session tokens, and that is non-Kubernetes specific. Like I said, that's you could use that with another web app, or I think you also use it with mobile apps as well, because they're all web apps anyways, right? So
thank you, Jim.
I don't know what we had next, but I got an update from one of the gatekeeper people on something that is related to one of Lee's proposals. So Lee had talked about wanting to be able to have per namespace configurations for Ratify, which would require passing the namespace from gatekeeper into Ratify. And there is not a plan to support anything other than an array of strings right now. So their suggestion was either to bring a compelling case to the gatekeeper meeting about why we should change the contract, or to design our own homebrew protocol that can exist within an array of strings. So that was one of the challenges. Like he was like, oh, well, why don't you just put the like the subject reference and then like pound namespace or something like that. So barring a major or barring some investment into gatekeeper to see if we can have them move that interface a little bit, we'll probably have to change how or plan around that for how we would introduce getting more information out of the Kubernetes object and into Ratify.
Eric, I think I missed context, or I missed some meeting. I don't know, what are we talking about? Namespace level configuration?
So Ratify, we have the configuration for Ratify that can tell you which certificates you should put into your trust store.
Correct.
And maybe which verifiers you're going to use. And Lee had given a proposal that it might be nice for that configuration to be per namespace. So if you have a single cluster where multiple teams share it in different namespaces, having Ratify be able to act differently depending on the namespace that some object is going to go into. And that seemed reasonable to me, but the catch was that we are limited in the data that we can pass because we have to abide by the contract that Gatekeeper has for the external data provider interface from Rego. And so I had asked them, because they had put out a document within Microsoft about how they might be doing some external data design things. And I asked if there was a plan to extend that interface at all, and they said no. So If we would want to be able to add arbitrary parameters or like more structured data to the external data provider call from Rego, we would have to submit a proposal and defend it in the gatekeeper weekly meeting. So in the short term, I think if we wanted to support something like that, I would opt for figuring out some way that we could encode the data through the existing contract.
Is
Today
it
we get a
currently a
list of,
string?
no, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question, Eric. Is it currently a string?
So currently it is an array of strings, and they did the array of strings to, like, if you're going to submit a deployment as your object and you had init containers and many containers as part of one pod, they did that so you could batch the validation request into one external call and perform the validation across all of those. So that was their original rationale for giving an array of strings. So anything we could still, yeah. So as long as it's a string, we could put it in one of the strings, but our provider will have to know how to pick apart whatever we put in there.
Today those strings are image references.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the ask is to have the trust store configured at the namespace rather than at the image level. And because
So
namespace is a Kubernetes concept, whereas the verifier, notary verifier, is an image signing concept.
right.
How
So
do they tie together if they have to be agnostic of the platform?
yeah. So this came out of Lee's proposals for a more Kubernetes native experience. So there's probably other things we would have to talk about for things like features that how we will make sure that features that we introduce to have a good Kubernetes experience won't stomp on the other experiences.
Yeah.
But this one was specifically like, let's say you have team A and team B and they use their own namespaces, team A, team B, and team A has one certificate and team B has another certificate. And that's the only certificate they want to be considered when doing signature validation. Well, we right now only have one notary verifier and we only have one config. So they'd have to provide all of them in one, and then we would validate every container against every root. So that's not for the notary verifier, maybe it makes sense because, you know, you'd still hit the one that's valid, assuming it's valid. But one of the ones that they brought up was like the license check or like SBOM validation. If different teams have different SBOM validation criteria, that conflicts. There's no way to support that right now. So if there was specific verifiers where individual teams that share a cluster with different namespaces wanted their validation criteria to be used in their namespace, and it conflicts with other people in the cluster, we can't support that. So that was the original rationale for the change, and then this was just a note about how it will still be kind of complicated to support that through Gatekeeper.
Yeah, the only way is they have to organize their artifacts at the repository level. Like if team A, team B, let them have two repositories, team A, team B, and that's how they identify. And then they can configure the settings at the image reference level, right? Team A, team B. You see my point? That's where I think, I don't know where we are with the repository level permission. We were thinking of this hierarchical model for the repositories within ACR. That would make sense. Then that would be a kind of an neutral model, whether it's Kubernetes or whether it is non-Kubernetes. You organize your artifacts and isolate them for teams, unless multiple teams share the same artifacts. That's a different story.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic to discuss. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll, I think we'll have to do some more work on Lee's
Yeah, define
issues
the use cases more clearly. Yep. Yeah. Sure.
But yeah, just wanted to share since I got that confirmed.
Because this needs supports from gatekeeper, right? You're saying the request that is sent to us to the Ratify.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Eric, do you want to add a note in the meeting notes, and then we can just point that to Lee and continue the discussion next time he joins?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. My Zoom crashed, so I won't try to share my screen again. It crashed last time when I tried to share, but I just had a quick question about the file watcher item that I'm working on. I just realized we can watch the configuration file and reload the verifiers, etc. There's another scenario where like it came to me during testing where like I can add more certificates to the certificate directory because now we support a path. Does that, theoretically, when there's new files being added to the path for the certificate directory, we need to reload the verifier as well. Is that correct? So that's another thing to watch.
But at that point, wouldn't it be specific to a verifier? Because notary verifier takes a directory. Some other verifier doesn't care about the directory. How do you be? It's just you reload every verifier?
Yes, exactly, Teja. Like,
because you are just, today the model is, if anything changes in the config, you're just refreshing the executor, right? Which will again reload every verifier and every store.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then wouldn't it not address this issue?
So because if I added a certificate, let's say the path is folder A, and I'm watching for the configuration file, and the configuration file already points to folder A. And if I added a new certificate in folder A, the configuration file did not change. So I didn't reload the verifier.
Shouldn't that be very specific to notary verifier? Notary
Yes.
verifier config reader rather than at the higher level, correct?
Correct.
Because this directory is specific to the notary verifier, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe we can track it as a separate item, but does it make sense to have another folder watcher thing just for notary?
I was just browsing the code, like what do we have in the configuration reader for the notary?
So we have an array of strings, and the strings can be specific files, or it can be a path to the directory.
Are we doing that? Config verification. Or when we get the verifier service, at which point we read all the certificates.
Yeah.
And that is done only during the creation of the verifier.
Yes.
I see. Yeah, if that is a use case, yes, we have to add it to the notary verifier, right? Just want to confirm this is different from the config update.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I was running a test case where like I added a file and I was like, oh, the verifier should be reloaded, but because there's no configuration change, nothing got reloaded. So I was like, okay, there's like another thing that we have to watch just for everywhere where we kind of load all the certificate from a directory. Like today, the only verifier that reads from a directory is notary.
Okay. And we do that, right, Susan? We read it from the directory, or we offload it to the library that we use? Notary.
We read it. We read it.
Okay. Yeah, I see. Because if we do that, we may have to do if there is a use case for that. Yep.
Yeah, there is a use case. I think if we, even the key vault CSI driver, if the certificates are stored in key vault, there's like, if you have added keys somewhere, like they have a synchronization process,
Okay.
which probably will end up with new files in some directory.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, if there is use case, but that code will live in the notary verifier.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll create a tracking item that we can address this in the future.
sure. Yeah, thank you.
And Eric, I had another question for you with the, like how the verifiers are created, you know, through sub processes. Like if we just switch out the verifier or create new verifier, it'll create new process, right?
So the expectation currently is that we run the verifier to completion. So it
Yeah.
will, so it doesn't just sit there, and that's per request. So if you change the configuration and you launch a new verifier process, it will be the new version because the verifier reads its config from standard in. So the next time after you change the config, the next time you call the verifier, it will be whatever the new thing is.
Yeah, if I just switched out the verifier reference in the executor, what happens to the old verifier process?
Assuming that it's not currently, there shouldn't be one, assuming you don't switch it while a verification is going. Because the verifier will just run and then it spits out the results and then it's dead. So
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. Like that after, at the end of the verification, it's it returns and it's gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which verifier you're talking is also important here. There is this
Oh.
built-in verifier which does not go through that command path.
Which one?
Notary verifier.
The built-in ones. Yes.
Notary verifiers. We are talking about an external verifier which gets invoked through command, whatever sub-process here.
That's true.
And the built-in ones, they are not gone.
There is no process. It's just if you switch the handle, yeah, all the changes gets reflected. Yeah, it's just an object in the memory.
Got it.
Reference. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, so they'll get like automatically garbage collected. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for confirming, Teja. Yeah, my last item on the agenda, I wanted to check with the timing of the meeting. Like we talked about like moving the timing of the meeting to suit other time zones. So I looked at the CNCF public event calendar. It's pretty packed. The only open slot in the morning is Tuesday, 10 to 11. That's the only, yeah, that like I flipped through the month of June and that was the only open slot for other recurring meetings. So I think like if we have people attending the Ratify community meeting from different time zones, does it make sense to do like every other week we'll have like one in the morning, maybe one in the afternoon sort of model? Like Bin, is 4 p.m. a good time for you? What time is it in Shanghai right now?
Yeah, it's 8 a.m. right now.
Okay, so like the 4 p.m. would be your 7 a.m.
Yeah.
So 10 a.m. PST is 1 a.m. So that one.
Oh.
If Google serves me right, so that one.
Yeah, we can talk while zombies are going around. Yeah.
So like, how do people feel about like every other week we can have one maybe in the morning? Like if people in Europe want to attend from time to time, they can make the morning meeting, and then Shanghai we can keep the same time for Shanghai. You know, like we'll do like a every other week sort of model.
10 a.m. every time we have a stand up, but if that, yeah, I'm okay if everybody agrees, I'll just attend the alternate meeting. For me, every day we have the team stand-ups at 10 a.m.
Yeah, I know. A lot of, companies do all their regular churn meetings in the morning, so it'll probably be, it'll be more difficult sometimes. But then, yeah, I guess I think having every other seems reasonable, so that people can
Yep.
we have more participation. It would be good to know how other projects handle that sort of thing, or if their answer is we just kind of don't handle it and we just have it at the same time, and it's hard
Record
for
it
people.
and keep it available. Yeah, because every
Yeah,
meeting
yeah.
is available on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
I'm okay because I'm not the maintainer. So you folks are the maintainers. If that is important, you have to be present. So I'm like a community member. So I'll try to attend wherever I can.
Same here. I'm not a
Jimmy,
maintainer.
we don't have a say. We are not
I mean,
stakeholders.
I'm writing some code, but I'm not what I would consider a maintainer. So it's really up to you all. I mean, it's 7 o'clock for me on the eastern side of the state, so I can make it work.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I will try to come up with a poll, and then we can vote on it once I have like a, what is it called? A doodle survey ready. I'll try to have it next week.
Thank you.
Yep, that's all for
I
today.
do have some comments on your HackMD, Susan, for
Sure,
your
Tanja.
file watcher. Yeah, just for my own clarification. Yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
No, do we have time now? Oh, no, we can do it offline, right? I just left some comments on that.
Oh, okay. Sure. Thank you. Yep. I'll read up. Thank you, Teja.
Thank you. Nice seeing you all, folks. Yeah, bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah. See you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.